Welcome to EnTrench, a 21 Pilots podcast. Hello, local dreamers. Welcome to EnTrench. My name is Anna, and this is episode 66, the Goner music video. Make sure you watch the video beforehand and are ready for an in-depth analysis. And I will also give a trigger warning today for suicide. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope your mental health especially is going well, but if not, know that I'm also struggling. The past month, more like a month and a half now, I've been struggling pretty consistently with depression and grief, and they've kind of just alternated. Maybe they're kind of mostly the same, I don't know, but I definitely am realizing, like, after having therapy, I'm like, okay, I have some new stuff to work through. So yeah, I'm in a very weird and also anxiety-inducing transition season where most of my life is just changing and I have very little stability, and I hate it. And my body hates it because it's just been freaking out. Specifically, I lost multiple friends at the same time, and so that's been really, really hard and confusing, and a lot of different emotions for a lot of different reasons. And so basically, I was talking with my therapist, having a really hard time in my last appointment. I've had a lot of anger, especially, coming up lately. And it seems like she wants me to look into, like, abandonment, which is not something I've really explored before. I've explored a lot of things. I've worked through self-esteem, I've worked through attachment styles, which I continue to work through. So many things, and it's just wild, like, how you can still run into things that you don't know and that need healing. Obviously, like, we always need healing, but I'm always just amazed at the amount of deep layers of things that I have to unlearn and work through. And so I think this is just going to be a new one, and I know that I can do it because I've done this with so many other things. But yeah, it's definitely very unfamiliar for me. So it's also like, I know that I need to work on stuff now because I've been given a little information, but also, like, I've had so much lethargy for so long that it's also, like, overwhelming at the same time to consider doing work on something, even though I really enjoy, like, mental and emotional work because I know that it's so rewarding. So just trying to be gentle and patient with myself, and I hope you are too. So I think this will probably be short today. There's not a whole lot with this video, it's only 2 minutes long, but let me briefly give the background. So this video is posted on February 11th, 2012, and it has over 6.6 million views, which always just astounds me how, like, everything of theirs, no matter how old it is, always has millions of views. I'm always impressed. And I love also how the end of this video cues up Heavy Dirty Soul, because it just continues to play into the fact that they're always pre-planning albums and music, and that's just, like, one of the coolest things to me as I continue to dig into Tyler's songwriting. And I posted this on my personal Instagram a few weeks ago, but I genuinely believe, like, if Bob Dylan deserved a Nobel Prize in Literature, Tyler Joseph definitely does, because he plans so thoroughly in the way that, like, a novelist would, in a way that I personally don't know of with other artists. Of course, people will, like, plan an album maybe alongside another one or right afterwards, but, like, who plans, like, 4 albums ahead of time? I feel like that's unheard of. So anyway, just more reasons that I love them very deeply. Let's dig into the little of the video that we do have. So it starts with the scene that is set, which is a snowy night in a neighborhood. You know, your classic suburban Midwest neighborhood. And I think snow and the fact that it's nighttime are both significant because it's very much a setting of everything being muffled, everything being quiet. You only have your thoughts with you, which is very ominous in this song, of course. And on top of that, it's like very much isolation. There's no one else around. Everything is magnified, and in that way, as we see with nighttime over and over again, the bad is magnified, and the visuals really emphasize that with what he's singing and working through. The accordion is the main element in this video, which we don't have, or at least maybe it's just more buried, in the recorded version. And it's creaking, which kind of also sets the tone of there being a lot of exhaustion. Maybe he's played these thoughts through his mind a billion times, and he's just exhausted of the cycle and the repetition and the fixation on the negative. I thought it was also interesting that an accordion is used for this song, because I feel like in any other context I've ever heard an accordion, it's like very lively music, and this is like the antithesis of I can't even speak of liveliness. So it's interesting, kind of similar to how he will play the uke, but the songs aren't always happy. I really am intrigued by that juxtaposition of how we do associate certain instruments with like optimism or positivity, and in this case it's used for the opposite. I feel like that almost makes it more interesting that there is an accordion. Then I also want to know, I forget where I saw this or who I heard this from. It's not my original thought. But I also wanted to note that there is this ominousness in the sound and the accordion specifically, because even though it's creaking, because it's old and it literally has to make the notes, it also does sound like a rope swinging, like someone is hanging. And that obviously is like a very dark image, but that can also fit the despair and hopelessness in this song, especially as this is a much more like worn out and exhausted version of the song, whereas the other one is a lot more high energy and full of fight, I guess. We see that Tyler is standing in the street when it pans back to the scene, and he's looking down, so I feel like he's very much like meditating on what he's saying, but also looking down, I feel like kind of symbolizes, especially in the midst of depression, that he's very trapped inside of himself and his thoughts, just because he can't even look up and look around and see anything beyond himself. He's very focused on like the music and what he's saying and what he's working throughout this entire video. I also wanted to note that we see the footsteps all around in the snow on the road, and it kind of alludes to the fact that he's been pacing and very restless, also with these thought loops in his head going on and on. So then it zooms in on Tyler as he starts singing the actual words, and we see that he's wearing the skeleton hoodie that we've seen before, but I think in this context it really showcases that everything that's inside is on display on the outside now. And interestingly enough, the concept of like being inside out reminded me of the Hillsong track where they say, "From the inside out, Lord, my soul cries out." And because in this case, like, he is crying out, he is letting his insides be on display because he's so exhausted. And in that way, though, he's also very vulnerable because his insides are out to also be attacked from the enemy and from Blurryface as well. I noted that the camera is very shaky as well, adding to the unsteadiness of his mental situation. And it zooms in briefly on his fingers, and I think this shows that he's very much clinging to the music. He's not just saying the words, but a lot of what's happening is him needing the music to be a foothold to grab to in a time where he feels very helpless, as if he's rock climbing, perhaps. The notes and the melody and the lyrics are all of the different rocks that he has to cling to, otherwise he'll fall. And I think he's always done a really good job of displaying music as like necessary armor to get through hardship. And I think having a lot of emphasis in this video on the instrument itself is a really beautiful homage to that need. And then there's also cuts of Tyler yelling throughout, and I think this could be him fighting with himself, really the physical depiction of how we beat ourselves up internally, whether we have low self-esteem and think we suck, think we're the worst person ever, whether we have a lot of shame, whether we are very remorseful over something we've done, but it's mostly coming out in anger. I think this does a good job of bringing something also inside out. But on the other hand, this could also be representative of him fighting Blurryface or Satan through the music that he's making and through the words that he's saying, as he's feeling very enslaved and trapped to this hopelessness. And then, like I already said, there's Blurryface sounds near the end that then float into Heavy Dirty Soul, which emphasizes that this album is very much a cycle, and specifically like cyclical thoughts that he goes through that have their ebbs and flows, their ups and downs, but ultimately never end, at least on this side of eternity. So then we see him shakily remove his hat. It seems like he's very scared at this point. Perhaps he's feeling very overcome by the negativity, by the enemy in a way that he wasn't in the recorded version. And so I think that's also an interesting parallel of like, sometimes you can be faced with depression and thoughts that are very convincing and sneaky in a way that like really drag you down and make you believe that the lies are truth. And it's scary. That's scary to believe that something is true that's completely false. Just like the demon with the fake torch on the porch and all of that. But in a way, like the body being afraid is also kind of a warning light and an indicator that maybe something isn't quite right. And so in a way, I think like when we think of shaking in our body, shaking whether we're cold or anxious, a lot of times that's also like our body's way of protecting itself. And so even if he's in this despair, his body's still trying to protect him at the end of the day. I feel like even just that concept of like shaking when you're cold, it's like God has literally given us bodies that he wants to try their best to protect ourselves. You know, he's given us so many things I don't fully understand, as I'm not like a huge science person, but you know, anytime I hear about anything like blood cells and all that kind of stuff, I'm always just amazed in the intricacy details in which God allows us bodies that try to protect ourselves. It's just incredible to me. As well as like bodies that produce life for women. Insane. So then at the very end, we see him zip his skeleton hood over his face. Again, this image of vulnerability, that his insides are completely outside now, but also he's hiding. He's very much ashamed with just confessing what he's struggling with, because I feel like in a way depression can be very shame heavy, because you feel like you're having despicable thoughts, you know, and part of that is because of how much is stigmatized, or suicidal ideation is stigmatized. So you can very much other yourself. And this reminded me of Genesis 3:8. So right after Adam and Eve eat of the fruit, it says, "And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden." And this is also right after they sewed clothes for themselves because the fruit made them realize they were naked. The way that when sin and evil enters, you're immediately aware of shame and wrongdoing, and also feeling very vulnerable in a negative way. I feel like vulnerability is ideally supposed to be a positive thing, and oftentimes we do discuss it as a good thing, but sin also makes vulnerability a bad thing, because you can be vulnerable to being hurt. the camera falls, and so there's kind of this ambiguity of like, why did we fall into darkness? Did the good or did the bad win? Not entirely sure, mostly because it's an ongoing fight. We know who will win, but I like how there's kind of that little bit of emphasis on the ambiguity of spiritual warfare when you're still in the thick of life on Earth. And then at the very, very end, when he briefly pops back on the screen again, we see him like slightly shake his head, which I think we see especially in the blurry face era as a whole, and just kind of emphasizing this idea that he's very much feeling these spiritual attacks and is trying to shake it off and to ward it away from him, even though it's very strong and feels like it's very much dragging him down. So that was really all I had, because again, there's really not much in the video, but I do want to emphasize a few things. I think this video, especially compared to the other version, highlights that there is so much danger of believing narratives that you speak over yourself, because your thoughts can be wrong. They're not always true, and they're obviously not always of God either. So I feel like that's also why therapy is so important, and genuinely working to improve your mental health. So much of it is realizing your ability and the courage and power God has given you that you possess to be able to change your thought patterns and your thought habits, to change the narratives that you say about yourself. I think especially when you're vulnerable in anxiety and depression and all other mental illness, it's easy to believe that your worth, your identity, what people think of you is stuff that's completely untrue. And if we can just start from that starting point of we are very susceptible to lies when we're going through something triggering, through something that's lasting a season, like I've been in. Just start from the point, okay, I'm going to be really susceptible to lies, so let's go from here and start discerning, okay, what's true and what's not. And even like, I believe that's a great starting point for prayer too. Working through anything is just asking God to give you discernment between what's true and what's not, because he is the way, the truth, and the life, and he very much fights for truth. And I genuinely believe with God, truth does win out every single time. And so it might not happen immediately, but just know if you keep being persistent about how much you're worth it, you'll start being able to excavate and dig up the truth that is there, even when it feels like you're in so much of a fog. I completely empathize with that feeling, and like truth will never come out, and you'll never be able to know what's true and what's not. Just keep doing one little thing at a time that you know is going to be helpful for you, whether it's drinking water, whether it's getting a snack, getting a little extra sleep. It really does start with the basics for any type of mental illness. I know that's like probably driven so hard into the ground, but I mean, it's true for a reason. And even with stuff like exercise, like I know as a recovering perfectionist, it can feel like you have to do a billion things in order for something to count. But if you're depressed, and like for me, the only thing I've had energy for is walking, that's fine. Like walking is great, and it's better than nothing. And you take any little win that you can. And that's the thing too that at least for me has really helped me on my mental health journey, is learning that you can encourage yourself. You can be a cheerleader for yourself in the way that your therapist is so good at. You can actually start becoming that person for yourself as well. You already have it in you. You already have the Holy Spirit in you. So you have so much potential to not only encourage all the people that you love, but encourage yourself. And that can start with like, wow, good job, fill in your name. Like, I just drank some water. Like, that's a great step. That's good for my body. That's good for me. And I mean, I know it might be awkward for some people who don't like compliments or anything like that, but it doesn't even have to be a compliment. Like words of affirmation are something that everyone needs, even if that's not your top love language. And it really is a game changer when you give yourself that affirmation. And so similarly, I also just wanted to emphasize that depression, like anxiety, exaggerates the truth and it others you. That's a big thing I was going through the past month, is taking lies and using them to other myself from other people. I think with suicidal ideation and depression especially, Satan's goal is to other you from other people, to make you feel ashamed and stuck in the shame, and that you're always going to be shame, you're always going to be your thoughts. But in reality, there's so much commonality in human pain, in human suffering, in human sin, and in human shame. And I've said this so many times, but it's always worth repeating that even in depression, in the deepest lies and beliefs, even in suicidal ideation, you are not alone. Other people have also experienced those things, and sometimes something else that can just make you feel 1% better and 1% more hopeful is connecting with someone you know has had similar struggles to you. It's going to be scary and vulnerable at first, but it's going to be a beautiful version of vulnerability where someone else can say, yeah, I hear you and I see you and I understand. And I think that's also affirming to know that you're not alone in your bad experiences. And even like mentioning some of the thoughts you're struggling with most that are cycling through your brain the most, someone else could say they've also thought that same thought. And there's so much power in being able to say me too. And if you have, your own baggage, your own testimony, story, continual weakness with mental illness, whatever it is, just know like you have so much power in your story to be able to empathize with other people and to be able to give other people hope through the things that you've been through already. And so just know that no matter what you've been through mentally, it's such a strength to be able to connect to even more people, to be able to empathize with even more people, and to be able to say me too. And so I hope, if nothing else, you know that your mental illness is bringing you through trials so that you can help other people too. I think advocacy is the most invaluable thing that God has given us throughout all of our horrible experiences, to be able to make something beautiful. And yeah, so while this video is a little, by little I mean a lot, darker than the recorded blurry face version, I think it also paints the spiritual warfare in a different light that makes it a lot more real and serious of how isolating the experience of depression, of suicidal ideation can be. But probably the biggest lie that I see in this visual is the fact that he's alone and that he feels isolated in it, and even it looks like he's isolated in it. So I just want to take these last words to say, don't be afraid to question even what things might look like. I think just as the band emphasizes how important it is to think, I think it's also really important to question and to not just take everything for what it is. And spiritually, like God says, to take every thought captive, and that's another way to really like stop everything that is coming at you and examine it and question it and decide if it's God breathed or if it's not, if it's leading you in a good direction or if it's not, and go as slow as you need to in any and every way, because we're constantly bombarded with so much, not only on the internet, not only around us in hustle culture, but also inside of us too. We're bombarded with so many thoughts all the time. If you're anything like me, I'm an overthinker. So just know the power of questioning is so valuable. And yeah, So from here, that's really all I had to say. I know we're all impatiently waiting for the Paladin Straight video. Speaking of videos, would love to hear if anyone has any guesses about what's going to happen. And on that note, I want to hear from you anyway. So you can email EnTrenchPodcast@gmail.com with a written account of your 21 Pilots story or your favorite memories you have related to the band. You can also reach out with an episode request if you want to analyze a song, video, or album with me. And if you'd like to contribute to the analysis we've already covered, you can send an email or message me on Instagram at EnTrench_pod. You can find EnTrench on Podbean, Verbal, Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. I look forward to hearing from you. Tune in next time for Heathens. Thank you so much for listening, friends. Stay alive and remember, EnTrench, you're not alone.